Hello everybody, and welcome to today's video. We have a very special video today. It's two stories that I want to share with you guys. The first story is of a Hmong interpreter who works in a hospital, and the second one is of someone picking up things that don't belong to them and bringing home ghosts. Your typical usual cliche. Anyways, if you guys want to have your stories featured on this channel, please remember to send them to the email in the description below. And before we get started, remember to leave a like and subscribe and enjoy the show. Thank you for watching. I call this story The Call Light in Room 512. And it happened when I was working as a Hmong interpreter at a hospital in St. Paul. At the time, I was still fairly new to the job. I was not a doctor or a nurse. I was the person that they called when an elder could not explain their pain in English, or when a doctor needed consent forms, or when a family was standing in the hallway looking scared because nobody understood what was happening. Working as a hospital interpreter is strange because you're part of everything and not part of anything at the same time. You hear bad news before families fully understand it, and you translate words that make people cry. I would sit in rooms where someone's life changes, then 5 minutes later, you're called to another floor to explain medication instructions like your heart just did not get dragged across the hallway. During the day, the hospital is busy enough that you can keep moving. At night, when the halls get quiet and the lights dim, everything you hear during the day starts to follow you. The patient I still think about the most was an older Hmong man. He was in room 512 on the medical floor, admitted for a bad infection that made him weak and confused. He was not my relative, but like a lot of elders, after 2 conversations, he started talking to me like I was someone's nephew. He called me son and asked what clan I was from, asked if my parents still live in Minnesota, and told me that I was too skinny and that I needed to eat more. I had known him for less than an hour, and he was already judging my body. At first, his condition was serious, but not hopeless. Some days he was alert and joking, other days he was tired and drifted in and out of sleep. His daughter would come whenever she could, but she had kids, work, and other family obligations. Anyone who has taken care of an elder in the hospital knows how exhausting it can be. You feel guilty when you leave, guilty when you stay, and guilty when you do not understand the medical words. The elderly man kept on asking for his daughter, not in a panicked way at first, but with this deep worry in his voice. He would grab my wrist lightly and say, "Tell my daughter not to throw the box away." The first time he said it, I thought he was just confused. I asked what the box meant, and he looked toward the window like he was trying to remember something far away. Then a nurse came in to check his vitals, and the conversation was interrupted. The next day, he said it again. He told me that there was this metal box and that it was not trash, and that his daughter needed to open it before the family cleaned the garage. I asked if he wanted me to call her right then, but he became tired and closed his eyes. A few minutes later, when he woke up, he did not remember what he had been saying. That happened a lot with him. The messages came in pieces and then disappeared. I tried to mention it to his daughter one evening when she came in, but the room was crowded with relatives. A doctor came by, then a social worker, and then someone needed help with a parking validation. Looking back, I still feel guilty about that. I know I was busy. I know it was not my official responsibility to chase down a family message, but sometimes guilt just doesn't care what your job description says. Over the next few days, the elderly man and his condition got worse. The infection spread and his blood pressure became unstable. His confusion deepened. He would wake up scared, thinking that he was at home. Sometimes he would call for his wife, even though his daughter told me that her mother had passed away years earlier. One night, while I was helping translate for the nurse, he looked directly at me and said, "If I forget, I need you to remember." I told the man that I would try, and that was the last clear sentence he had ever said to me. He passed away 2 nights later, a little before midnight. I was not in the room when it happened, but I heard about it from one of the nurses. By then, I had been called to the emergency department for another family, so I only found out after I returned to the 5th floor and I saw that room 512 had the curtains closed and the hallway felt different. Hospitals have a specific kind of quiet after someone dies. People still move, machines still beep, and nurses still talk, but the air around that room changes. It feels like everyone is speaking softer out of respect for something that has not fully left yet. The next morning, that room was cleaned. The bedding was changed, the whiteboard was wiped, and his name was removed from the patient list. That is how hospitals work. A person can spend days or weeks in a bed, and then after they die, the room becomes available again. The floor keeps on moving because it has to. There's always another patient waiting. The strange things began to happen the next night. I was at the interpreter's desk near the nurse's station around 1:30 a.m., finishing notes from a call in the emergency department when the call light alarm went off. One of the nurses looked up and frowned. The screen showed room 512. She said that it was weird because the room was empty. Another nurse walked down the hall to check, and a minute later, she came back and said that there was no one inside, but the call light cord had been pressed. They reset it and joked that maybe housekeeping had bumped into it. That would have been easy to believe if it had only happened once. But 20 minutes later, room 512 called again. This time, the nurse unplugged and replugged the call light unit. She looked annoyed, not scared, because hospital equipment breaks all the time, but when it went off a third time, nobody laughed. Around 2 a.m., my interpreter phone rang. That phone was used for internal calls when staff needed language help. The display showed no extension, just unknown. I answered because that was my job. At first, there was only static, and then I heard an old man breathing. Slow, tired breathing. The kind I had heard from the elderly man during his last days. I said hello in English, and then I said it in Hmong. The static shifted. A voice whispered in Hmong, "The box." I froze with the phone against my ear. I asked who was calling, even though some part of me already knew that I did not want to answer. The line crackled, and then the voice whispered, "Tell my daughter." The call disconnected. I sat there for a long time, holding the phone, listening to the empty dial tone. I wanted to tell myself that it was a crossed line or some weird hospital phone glitch. Hospitals are full of old systems connected to newer systems, and half of them are just kind of held together as best as they can. But I swore I heard the voice told me about the box and to tell the daughter. There was no reason a random glitch would know either of those things. The next day, I called his daughter. I tried to keep my voice normal because there is no professional way to say that her father was calling me through the hospital phone even though he passed away. Instead, I told her that before he had passed, that her father mentioned a metal box more than once, and he seemed worried that the family might throw it away. Then, his daughter went quiet. She said that they were planning to clean out his garage that weekend because relatives were coming to help. I asked if she knew what the box meant. She said no. Her father kept a lot of old things, tools, fishing supplies, old papers, random things that he just kept around. She said he never threw anything away because he had grown up poor and believed that everything might be useful someday. I told her that if they had found a metal box, maybe they should open it before tossing anything. She thanked me, but I could tell she thought it was just a normal last message kind of thing. I almost left it there. I really did, but that night, room 512 called again. This time, when the call light went off, there was a new patient assigned to the room, but he had not arrived yet. Transport was delayed, the room was still empty, and the nurse standing beside me looked at the screen. then looked at me, and we both knew before anyone said anything. My interpreter phone rang a few seconds later. I answered with my heart already pounding. The old man's voice came through, clearer than before. He said, "Not the garage shelf, under the freezer." Then the line filled with static. Behind the static, I heard something like metal scraping across concrete. I heard a woman crying softly. Then the old man whispered, "My wife is inside." The call ended. I did not understand what he meant, but I did not want to understand. But I knew that I had to call his daughter again. It was almost 3 o'clock in the morning, so I waited until daylight because I didn't want to terrify her in the middle of the night. When I called, I told her I had remembered one more thing that her father said. I said that he mentioned under the freezer. His daughter stopped breathing for a second. She said that there was an old chest freezer in the garage that had not worked in years. The family had planned to throw it out with everything else. That weekend, she called me back. Her voice sounded different, shaken. She said that they moved the freezer and found a loose panel behind it near the wall. Behind the panel was a locked metal box. It was small, heavy, and wrapped in a cloth to protect it from dust. None of the relatives knew that it was there. Inside were old documents, jewelry, family photos, and a letter written by her father years earlier, addressed to his daughter. There was also a small cloth bundled containing some of her late mother's silver pieces and Hmong jewelry. In there were also some of her father's old military pins from the time he was serving as a soldier in the Secret War. His daughter had told me that her father had written that he was afraid that after he died, people would clean too quickly and throw things that they did not understand. He wanted his daughter to know which items belonged to her mother, which papers were important, and which photos had the names of relatives written on the back. When she had told me that, she started crying. She said that if I had not called, they probably would have thrown the whole freezer away without checking. Some cousins had already been loading trash into the truck. I did not tell her about the calls, not then, but only said that I was glad that they found it. That night, I worked again. I was nervous as soon as I walked onto the 5th floor. Room 512 had a patient in it now, a quiet, middle-aged man recovering from surgery. After that, the room became quiet. There were no more call lights from an empty bed, no more unknown calls to my interpreter phone, and the new patient in that room recovered normally and never complained about anything strange. A few weeks later, the daughter came to the hospital to bring a card for the staff. She found me near the lobby and thanked me again. She said that her family held a small funeral for their dad. She told me that the house felt different afterward, that it felt a little lighter. I nodded and I told her that I was glad. Then she said something that made my skin prickle. She said that before finding the box, her youngest son kept telling her that his grandpa was standing in the garage pointing under the freezer. She thought that he was just reacting to grief, but after they opened the box, her youngest son stopped seeing him. That was when I finally told her a little more. Not everything, but enough. I told her about the call light and the phone, and she did not look as shocked as I expected. She just quietly told me that it sounds like him, that even though he was gone, he was still worried about paperwork. After that, we said our goodbyes and went on our separate ways. About 6 months later, I was working another night shift. It was winter, and the hospital was quiet in that heavy way that it gets after midnight. I had just finished helping an older Karen family in the emergency department and was walking back toward the interpreter office when my phone rang. The display showed an internal room number, room 327. I did not recognize it, but I answered like normal. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then an elderly woman's voice spoke through the phone. She spoke in very clear Hmong. She asked me if I could help her as well. I stood in the hallway with the phone against my ear. unable to move. The lights hummed above me, and somewhere far away, a monitor beeped steadily. A nurse walked past and asked if I was okay, but I could not answer right away. Since it was my job, I decided to go to room 327. The whole time, I was worried. I was worried that it would be an empty room without anybody in there. Luckily enough though, when I got there, it turns out there was an elderly Hmong woman staying in that room. That made me feel a whole lot better, and I helped her translate some paperwork and translate things to the doctor. She eventually got better and was able to leave the hospital. Since then, I still work in healthcare, but I don't treat late-night calls the same way anymore. If a room number shows up with static on the line, I write it down. If a patient keeps repeating something that sounds random, I listen more carefully. If an elder says that there's one thing their family needs to know, I don't wait for a better time. Even now though, at the hospital that I work at, sometimes there are still empty rooms where the call light still comes through. Guys, I don't know about you guys, but honestly, hospitals just kind of freak me out, especially when it's late at night and you're walking down these long corridors and you're walking past these empty rooms, these empty hospital rooms. It's freaky, you know. It just got this liminal space vibe to it sometimes. And sometimes they have these weird, odd paintings on the walls or these different weird decorations and decor. It makes me feel a little uneasy, and it's the smell and how everything always has to be so clean and sanitized. Yeah, it's one of my kind of fears is being in a hospital at night. But you know, props to this Hmong interpreter. I know that there's a lot of jobs like that up in the cities, and these guys do a lot of work for the community. So this guy's got some guts for being able to continue working at a hospital where there are these Hmong ghosts asking him to help out and spread the message of something. But you know, let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section below. Let's continue on to the next story. A few years ago, my family and I were helping my uncle clear a small piece of land outside the city. It was not a real farm, not in the large commercial sense. It was instead an old orchard property that had been divided, leased, abandoned, and reused so many times that nobody in the family knew its full history. My uncle wanted to grow some vegetables there. The front section had already been cleared, but the back of the property was a little rougher. There were some old stumps still stuck out of the ground, rusted irrigation pipes that ran beneath the earth, and pieces of plastic and metal that surfaced every time we dug. It was the kind of land where every shovel strike seemed to bring out more rocks and just a lot more problems. The first day that we worked there, my uncle, my cousin, my wife, and my daughter came with me. The air was dry and dusty. We spent most of the day pulling weeds, moving broken branches, and clearing old debris. Near the back edge of the property, there was a row of eucalyptus trees. That part of the land felt quieter than the rest, though I could not explain why. The road was not far away, and we could still hear cars passing sometimes. But under those trees, the sound seemed softer. My uncle told us not to worry about that section yet. He wanted to finish clearing the front first. But I saw an old irrigation line sticking out of the soil near the trees, and I thought that I could pull it out loose quickly. The pipe was stuck, so I dug around it with a small shovel. As I loosened the dirt, something small rolled out and landed near my boot. At first, I thought it was a marble or a piece of glass, but when I picked it up, I saw that it was a small jade-colored button. It was flat and round, about the size of a quarter. It had 2 holes in the center and was wrapped in a piece of blue cloth. The cloth fell apart almost immediately when I touched it. The button was smooth and green. It was a little colder than it should have, especially after sitting in the dirt warmed by the sun. I thought it looked kind of pretty, as despite being in the sun and in the dirt, the button itself was still very smooth and almost glistening. I thought it was just something left behind by a worker decades ago, maybe from an old shirt or a jacket. I put it in my pocket and told myself that I would clean it later. When we got home, I rinsed the button in the kitchen sink. Dirt came out of the holes and ran into the drain in thin brown lines. After washing it, I set it on a small shelf near the dining area. By the time we finished dinner and got ready for bed, I had already forgotten about it. The first strange thing happened that night. I woke up a little after 2 a.m. because I was thirsty. The house was dark except for the nightlight near the stove. When I walked into the kitchen, I noticed something on the dining table. One bowl had been set out, with a pair of chopsticks resting across the top. That alone was not enough to scare me. People do things and forget, and maybe my wife had taken it out earlier. Maybe I had done it without thinking. But we had cleaned the kitchen before bed, and I remember the table being empty. I stood there for a moment, looking at the bowl. Nothing else happened and the house was quiet, so I put the bowl back in the cabinet, drank some water, and went back to bed. The next morning, I asked my wife if she had set out a bowl during the night. She said no. I asked my daughter, and she said that she had not touched anything. We all let it go because it was too small to make it to a problem. I thought it was strange, but maybe we just forgot. 2 nights later, though, it happened again. This time, there were 2 bowls on the table. They were placed side by side, each with chopsticks across the top. I found them when I woke up before dawn. The kitchen was quiet and the doors were locked. Everyone else was asleep, so I put them away without waking up anybody. In the morning, I told my wife about what I had saw and what happened. She looked uneasy, but she still tried to explain it. She said that maybe our daughter had been playing with it and forgot, or perhaps we left them out and only thought that the table was clear. Now, let me give you guys a clearer picture of how the bowls and the chopsticks were. The bowls that were set out were the ones that we usually use when we would eat pho, and the chopsticks were the plastic ones that had the Chinese characters, and sometimes it had like little dragons drawn on them. Now, during that time, I was just so dumb that I didn't connect it to the button that I had brought home from my uncle's property. Around that time, my daughter started mentioning people in the backyard. She didn't say it in a frightened way. She would be eating breakfast or coloring at the table, and then she would look toward the sliding glass door. Once, she asked if we were expecting visitors. Another time, she asked why people were standing near the fence so early in the morning. Whenever I would check outside the window, nobody was there. I told myself that she was seeing reflections in the glass. The backyard had a porch light, and at night, the windows reflected the kitchen and dining area in strange ways. It was easy to mistake shadows for people, especially for a child. I believed that explanation until I checked our backyard Ring camera. The camera had recorded motion at 3:12 a.m. The clip was grainy and dark. Most of the screen showed the fence and the side of the house, washed in a dim infrared light, that night vision light. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, the motion sensor adjusted. Near the fence, there seemed to be shapes. They were not clear. They could have been branches, shadows, or distortions from the camera, but they looked almost like people standing in a loose line. One shape seemed slightly taller than the others. Another appeared closer to the sliding door. The clip ended after 30 seconds. I watched it several times. The more I watched, the less certain I became. I showed my wife, expecting her to dismiss it, but she only watched once and told me to not show our daughter. After that, small things began happening every few days. By now, I had completely forgotten about the jade button that I had found. I honestly don't even know where it disappeared to. One time, I came into the kitchen and I smelled wet soil. Even though the windows were closed and nobody had been outside, the smell itself lasted for less than a minute. By the time my wife came in, it was gone. One evening, while we were eating dinner, my daughter stopped chewing and looked at the empty chair beside her. She did not scream or act afraid. She only stared for a few seconds, then moved her bowl closer to herself. I asked her what was wrong, and she said that someone was looking at her food. There was no one there. I told her that she was probably tired. She nodded and continued eating, but she did not look at that chair again for the rest of the meal. None of these things were enough to make us leave the house or call anyone. That was what made it difficult. If something had slammed a door, spoken clearly, or appeared in front of us, maybe we would have acted sooner. But the events and the occurrences were always small. Each of these incidents could be explained on its own. But together, they kind of made the house feel like we weren't the only ones living inside of it. I called my mom after the third time the bowls appeared. I told her about our experiences, what had happened, what my daughter kept on seeing. She told me to not worry and that her and my dad will come to our house to sweep it. A few days later, they showed up on the weekend and they brought a few things with them, a peach branch and some red corn. My mom swept the house while my dad followed behind her, throwing around the red corn kernels. My mom was sweeping around the house with a peach branch and telling whatever was in there that it didn't belong there and that it shouldn't stay there. After that, she and my dad tied some red strings on our wrists. Once that was completed, they went back home and we felt a little better. For the next couple of days, we didn't experience anything after that. No more bowls, no more strange things outside in the backyard, and my daughter seemed to be behaving normally. However, one morning when I was getting ready to go to work, I noticed something that I did not expect. There it was, sitting on the dinner table was another bowl with a pair of chopsticks on top. By now, all of those paranormal experiences were already out of my mind, and that just brought it all back. That then escalated and the paranormal activity returned. By this point, I decided to call my mom and dad again and told them that whatever they did didn't work. So my mom told me to not worry and that they will ask one of my aunties, who's a shaman, to come and take a look. A few weeks later, on a Saturday morning, all of my family members, along with some cousins and relatives, came over to our house. My auntie, who was the shaman, performed a ceremony. During that ceremony, she asked me if I had taken something from somewhere. I told her that I didn't take anything and that I didn't have anything on me, but she told me that there was something, that I did take something. And then that's when I started to jog my memory, and I remembered the jade button. By now, I did not remember where it had disappeared to or where it had gone. I told her that I had found a jade button while we were working on our uncle's farm and that I brought it home, but I don't know where it was. She told me that it was okay and that she will help us out. She continued the ceremony, and after she was finished, she told us something. She said that the jade button that I had picked up belonged to something else and that it had followed us home. She said that to not worry and that she already struck a deal with the spirit so that it would leave us alone, but from now on, to not pick up anything that did not belong to us and to not bring it home. After that, I got a lecture from my mom and dad, as well as my wife, about the whole thing that happened. Since then, I don't pick up strange things that I find on the ground anymore, and whenever my daughter wants to pick up things that she finds out in nature, I tell her to leave it alone. So moral of the story, don't pick up shiny objects on the ground. You know, I have a feeling that this story probably happened somewhere in California. The biggest reason why is when the author who sent the story mentioned the orchards. I was like, yep, that sounds like somewhere in California, because I know dang well in the Midwest, especially in Minnesota and Wisconsin, we ain't got no places that are like orchards like that are kind of common. Let's just say there's a few, but it's a little bit more common in the California area. And a part of me feels like perhaps that jade button was left behind by a Chinese worker or something like that because of the bowls and the chopsticks. That's not really like a Hmong spirit for sure, because if it was a Hmong spirit, it would be like a banana leaf, either that or a bowl with the little Hmong spoon, the metal one that's it's like a Hmong spoon. If you guys know, you guys know, right? But if it was a Hmong ghost, it would be a banana leaf or a Hmong spoon and a bowl. But for sure, that might be, the spirit of a Chinese worker. And then, maybe he brought along his buddies, and that's why there's so many bowls and so many people in their backyard. But moral of the story, guys, please, why do Hmong people keep doing this? They keep taking things. And even though all these OGs tell them, hey, don't pick up random objects and don't bring it home, they already have owners, But these young Hmong folks are like, oh, this is a cool looking rock. Actually, I shouldn't say anything because I'm kind of guilty of that too, so I'm sorry. But anyways, if you guys enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe. YouTube's telling me that you might like this video on screen, and thank you for watching. I will see you all next time. Have a good one, everybody.